How's it going, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another edition of LandO's Lock-ins, the series in which we do our darndest, our very best to make the most accurate CDL pick'em predictions possible. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the third season of LandO's Lock-ins, the series, honestly, that has inspired me to make a lot of content. You guys were amazing with this series last year. If this is your first time checking it out, I've already explained what this series is about. We're making pickems. We're going through basically every match, highlighting what my expectations are. You guys have been wonderful getting involved in the comments last season. If you guys are returning, welcome. Super happy to have you guys here. One thing that I do want to highlight before we get into the pickems already, because we gotta get into this. There's a lot of things going on right now. Matches are just days away. But I do want to let you guys know that we are making small but very good format changes to this video. I listened to a lot of feedback last year, wasn't able to do it until now. Essentially, we're kind of shortening it up a little bit, which is really a good thing. Previously, it's been, an hour, hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours. Yeah, I don't know how we were able to do that for that long. This time, and moving forward, we're going to try to shorten it up as much as possible. Try to make it, an easily digestible 20, 30 minutes. I mean, depending, and I know like in Major 1, we have like 12 matches rather than like the normal 10 per week. So there is that to think about. But I think it's just better overall. And the reason why it's better overall, because it's like, well, where's that extra conversation coming from? If you haven't noticed, there's a lot of content that's coming out on the channel right now, whether it's through the CDL Talent podcasts, if it's just LandO's Logic videos that are just coming out talking about different subjects, if it's Under One Roof, which is sports and esports together. I'm talking about all of this stuff some way, somehow. And so I think that content isn't going to be missed. I just don't want it to be overly replicated. And I think on a lock-in series like this, which already I think could be shorter in general, I think it's just overall better. So that now leads me to this screen right here. This will be the screen that we will be sitting on all season long. As you can see, these are all the matches that we have for Major 1 Week 1. And the ones that are highlighted are the ones that we're going to be talking about in depth. So these are the matches that we're going to be breaking down. The other ones I think that are obviously still important are just ones that I'm going to kind of give you my score for, and we'll kind of move on, which also helps with the length of this overall. So one last thing before we decide to jump into our first match, which as you can see is Boston Breach versus the Atlanta FaZe, is that I don't know what's going on with pickems. Like right now, as of the recording of this video, I don't know if pickems are returning. I don't know what's going on with that overall. So I've made my own screen. I normally do not ask you guys to leave likes to do this stuff. I mean, maybe I do, but not as often as other people. I would really appreciate it, strictly for the fact that like I spent an entire day getting this screen to look like pickems. Like this is actually in Google Sheets. Like I literally made this in Google Sheets. Try to make it look as accurate as possible. We're gonna have our own spin on it as well. So there is that. But yeah, honestly, I just tried to make it look as normal as it previously has. So I hope that you guys like the screen. I hope that it's fun to look at, because we're gonna be looking at it a lot throughout this season. So like I said, the matches in green are the ones that we're gonna be talking most about. The one in yellow we're also talking a lot about, and the one in yellow is also our lock of the week, which means that is the match that we are setting in stone. We get the most possible points out of that match. And again, all of these points are going to be tracked throughout the year. As you can see down here, this is the overall series score. Green means that we got it right. Red means that we got it wrong. Last year, our record was not good. It was over 500, thankfully. We had we had more matches right than we had wrong. But if we're going off Cold War, what a great season that was for pickems. Like Landon was on top of his game. And that is what we're aiming to do this time around. So without further ado, we will dive into our first matchup, which is the very first one of the MW2 season. You wonder if maybe there's a little bit of something to that. I don't know. Maybe like, you're starting things off, more pressure. I don't know. Something like that. Both teams did make a roster change. As we said, this one's not highlighted. So I'm just going to kind of break this one down quickly. Boston now with Big Wake, something to prove, breaching their second season. Very excited to see this roster. I think they have very high ceiling. The only problem is that you're facing off against Atlanta FaZe, who so far throughout scrimmages, I feel like have looked amazing. I am going to give this matchup victory to the Atlanta FaZe, but I think that this honestly could go to a game 5. I'm going to say 3-1 for now, just because I really trust FaZe. But in that coaching poll for Boston Breach, it wasn't great. Like they didn't rank them as highly as I would have liked. I hope this is a team that's not super slow off the gate. So with that being the case, I'm going to go with Atlanta to take this 3-1. Now, let's jump into our second series, right? This is, to me, one of the most important ones that we're going to have throughout this opening weekend, throughout this opening, very first week of matches, which is Optic Texas versus the Minnesota ROKKR. Both teams, very high expectations. Optic Texas, as we've talked about previously throughout all of the content, SCUMP'S final season. It's his very first match. We know, right? Optic Texas went through all the drama throughout the offseason. Half the team was dropped. Half of them were brought back together. And it feels like right now, based off of what I have personally discussed, what I've heard from other people, is that you think about Optic in one of two ways. It's either like, yeah, they're going to come back and fry because they're going to get back to that same Major 1 form that they've had previously. And then there's also this element of like, but yeah, what if they struggle off the start? Like, what if Major 1, they go 2-2 and they have like a top 6 finish? Like, is there any room for moves? Like, is this team like going all in? Like, no, we're not going to make a single roster change. We're sticking with this team. It does make you wonder, and it makes you wonder if there is a slow start, what happens? The positive for Optic fans, though, is that traditionally Optic Texas starts off the season very well. As a matter of fact, Optic Texas started off the Major 1 qualifiers in a very slow fashion, losing like back-to-back Game 5 round 11s. And they went on to win Major 1 at their home major. So there is that thing to consider as well. But again, you do have, I think, for sure some worries with Optic Texas, considering, like we said, that they had a much different offseason than everybody else. But you have two returning MVP candidates in Dashi and Shotzi. I know Shotzi technically wasn't listed, but, he was one of the better players in the game, without question. And so you have that element. As we said, Scump, his final season, so much coverage is going to be on him throughout this entire season, how he's going to play, how the other players react to his level of play, et cetera, et cetera. On the other side for Minnesota, right? They made some huge moves during this offseason. Attached now with Cammy, Bance, and Afro. ROKKR invests a lot, right, in the fact that this team is going to work out. Invested a lot in this team's ceiling. And if they do reach that ceiling, I think that we can all basically confidently say that this team will be contending. Right, if you're able to see Cammy reach the same levels that he was at in Cold War, which again didn't have a bad last season, it just wasn't the same Cammy. He wasn't a top 3 player, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Toronto, because of their struggles in terms of the SMGs, it now came more on him to have to perform. He wasn't at that same level because of the title, because of the difference of the game. And now at MW2, how does that play out? So I think there's a lot of questions on Cammy, probably more than like 99% of the league. Like, I think Cammy's in the top 1% of like what's going to be his level of play, the talent that could be there versus maybe the talent that may not be there. Also excited to see Afro and Bance together. I mean, both of those guys obviously come from different places. I thought that they were going to be on Toronto moving into this year. However, they find themselves on the ROKKR. And you're really looking to see if that grouping of two can find the perfect balance between slang and teamwork. And that could be something where we instantly start comparing Scump and Shotzi versus Afro and Bance. How do those two mixtures end up working? This is also a huge week for Minnesota, by the way. We'll go and pull up the pick'em screen. Big week for Minnesota because you have Optic Texas, and then instantly, less than 24 hours later, you're in the Battle of the North, which again is our lock of the week that I'm excited to talk about. So, Optic Texas versus Minnesota. I think there's something to say about coaching power rankings, right? Like, Minnesota was ranked number 3, tied with Toronto Ultra. Optic Texas surprisingly listed at 7th. So I think a lot of people would maybe off the rip be thinking, yeah, Optic's going to walk away with this series. But if you are looking at recent coaching power rankings, I think you give Minnesota quite a bit of props. Is it enough for them to take this series? That is up to you. However, it's going to be just short for me. I think this is an entirely new Minnesota team. I think that they are going to come out strong, play well. And I think because of both of those mixtures, Minnesota playing well, rated highly early, but in matches, they are still young. This in terms of being together, I think that is going to play somewhat of a part when it comes down to this matchup. And so I think this one goes down to the wire, but Optic Texas ends up walking away with the victory. So that's the way that I'm going to rock with it. I honestly debated on maybe going with ROKKR for this opening series. But I just feel like right now, Optic Texas, they do have that chemistry advantage. It is the start of the title. ROKKR at least on paper, based off of what people have talked about, may be looking better in scrimmages, but I'd give Optic Texas the edge when it comes down to this game. So moving on swiftly into our next match, Vegas Legion versus the LA Thieves, a very, very intriguing series. You've got your defending champions up against the newly named Las Vegas Legion. And they've honestly been one of the best stories so far of this offseason, right? They added in ProLoot, TJ, and Clayster now alongside of Temp. Not only have they looked solid in terms of scrims, but if you do, again, relate back to that coaching power rankings that Breaking Point ended up doing, had Las Vegas Legion ranked at 5. I've had the pleasure of being able to watch, along with a lot of you guys, the streams that Clay and Temp were doing. They look good. They look like they're one of the teams that just has figured out the game earlier than a lot of other rosters. They were also one of those teams that I think, well, they were one of the last teams that like stopped streaming scrimmages. So like we were kind of just watching Vegas probably more than any other team, maybe alongside of like Optic and a few others. There is a level to that where I think that maybe things could be slightly inflated. Like, we are seeing Vegas do well, but we're not seeing every other team do well. And so you do kind of factor that a little bit. But this is a huge moment, right? For Legion, for this new franchise, or new franchise location, right? They've in some ways rebranded. They brought in a big name in Clayster. This might be in the last 2 seasons, 3 seasons, maybe. I don't even know. If Las Vegas Legion walk away with this victory, this would be one of the biggest wins in franchise history, right? The fact that you have this new lineup, you're heading into a new title, you're facing off against the defending champions. If you take down the LA Thieves in the opening match of Major 1, that would say a lot about this team. That would say a lot about this franchise, the page turn that I'm sure they're trying to have for all of these players, who it feels like, all these guys are on the come up. Like they're trying to improve themselves. Like Clay literally spent, he's been in challengers throughout this last season. I mean, there's a huge storyline to talk about with Clay that I highly recommend that you guys check out the Talent Roundtable for, because we talked about that a lot. But like I said, a huge story for Clay. I mean, ProLoot obviously, didn't get the full-time starting position on Optic Texas. TJ dropped from Boston Breach, and then Temp, it feels like you're either a big fan of Temp or you're not. Like in terms of what he was able to do last year for Vegas, there's a lot of people who've criticized him for his in-game comms. I've been a person to do that as well. But a really big series for everybody on this Las Vegas Legion team. I think a lot of people aren't expecting them to necessarily win this series. But if they did, what that would mean for this roster, what it would mean for this franchise is insane. On the other side for Thieves, defending champions, right? Definitely had the best offseason of any other roster out there, right? No stress. You're off of the win. No roster changes needed. No roster questions needed. I mean, the other 2 teams that decided to stay together, Optic Texas and Seattle Surge, definitely had their moments for conflict. Thieves, happy. You know what? Hey, cool. MW2's coming out. Let me relax. Let me go on vacation for a little bit. They didn't have that same worry, confrontation, things of that nature, which again, sometimes is a positive, sometimes it's a negative. The one thing that I was really, really impressed about, however, is that it's very easy for a defending champion to come into the next season fat and happy, right? Cool. We won, for Octane and Kenny, like we won our rings after this being like the biggest storyline around us. Envoy's able to capture the championship after leaving Optic, getting dropped from that team. Draza, after finally being recognized by this franchise to pick him up as a full-time starter in his first full season, never being replaced, he ends up winning a ring. Like there's a level to that. And the reason why I feel like this team, there could be an element to that, but one thing that I was really impressed about was that they were ranked number 1 in the coaching poll, which again, they easily could be number 2, number 3. They're coming into a new game. Like I said, you're confident. You didn't have anything to worry about. Some level of complacency is very easy for it to set in. So I was very impressed at the fact that this team was able to be as high in the power rankings that they were, just ahead of Atlanta FaZe. And I don't know if they're done riding that high. Like I said, like the LA Thieves, like the way that they were able to close out that season after the struggles that they had, I think that there's a lot that could be said about the Thieves. Like maybe this isn't done yet. Like this could be Vanguard 2.0. Like they figured out a very fast TTK crazy spawn type of game. I don't know, like MW2 by no means is the same game as Vanguard, But you do question in terms of like, is that same methodology, is that same, blueprint that you were able to figure out, does it translate into this title? And so that really, to me, is something to really look out for when it comes down to Thieves, because they also have a big week. Face off against Vegas Legion on Sunday. As you can see, they face off against the Atlanta FaZe, which will be another big game to highlight. Debated on making that one my match of the week. I know we're all big fans of Vegas. I think LIT could be a hard counter for them. It sounds like Vegas right now very, very good at hardpoint. S&D and control, maybe lacking slightly. And so I feel like, we talked about this last year for different rosters. Thieves were the hard counter to teams that really relied on hardpoint. So if there is any semblance to go off of, I think that the Thieves come out, win the opening hardpoint, S&D and control, maybe slightly up there, but I like the Thieves ultimately in this series. I think just in general, because they are coming off the championship, because of the fact that they are defending, you're coming in against the Vegas Legion. Normally you see the Legion on the other side. You're like, cool, we're going to walk away with this dub. I think there's a level of seriousness now that you come into this match for. And then on top of all of it, like I said, I think the hard counter is definitely there. Thieves, I think to me, are probably the better hardpoint team of the two right now. And if that is the case, I like the LAT's chances of the 2-3-5, game types, if it were to put it that way. But eager to see Vegas Legion. I think this is one of the most exciting teams to take a look out for when we talk about this upcoming season. So eager to watch this matchup. We'll now jump in quickly to LAG versus Seattle. This is a fun way to close out day one, by the way, for sure. LAG now with Arcitys. They have been a team that we've talked about a decent amount because they have Arcitys. Feels like a lot of people still just have not forgiven them for the fact that they have kept the other three players. Seattle, one of only three teams that did decide to keep their same roster. Pred, Sib stepping into their second year, both primed, hopefully, for another fantastic season. Seattle, a roster that was known for their highs and lows, sometimes very, very inconsistent. But it felt like at champs, the fact that they were able to finish third just goes to show the talent ceiling that this roster has. And now stepping into, again, their second season together, it feels like maybe those things start to wash away a little bit. So I don't know. Like I was definitely a little worried about where LAG was listed on the overall coaching power rankings. They were listed number 11, next to Florida and London. So I don't know. I feel like Seattle are going to come into this with a game plan. I think they're focused. I almost want to say this goes to a game 5, but I don't know. I'm just not the biggest fan of what I've heard from LAG. Like it just doesn't look like all the pieces have been put together yet. I think that they could make the right plays. I've seen some good moments from them in the hardpoint scrims that I have been able to check out, but it's just, I don't know. Like I want to really like LAG and I just have a hard time doing that right now. So I think with that being the case, I'm going to say Seattle takes this over the Gorillas in a 3-1 fashion. And we move on to Saturday, our lock of the week. And the reason why I made this our lock of the week is because it might be my favorite match of Major 1, Week 1. Minnesota ROKKR versus Toronto Ultra. There are new levels now to this already fantastic rivalry. Battle of the North has reached new heights. Bance and Cammy go from Toronto to Minnesota. Standy goes from Minnesota to Toronto. During the offseason, Afro was heavily rumored to be going to the Toronto Ultra, then ends up in Minnesota instead. We talked about the ROKKR earlier, right? Prior result could put them down 0-1. If they lose to Optic Texas, they would be in danger of going 0-2. If they end up losing this to Toronto, which again makes you a little worried for ROKKR off the rip. Huge week for them, as we said. But this is a grudge match. Like I said, this is a grudge match. I think especially for Minnesota, Toronto's really been that team. Like they've been the Battle of the North crown champions, considering what they were able to do on LAN. ROKKR, big, opportunity for them last season. They kept the same team coming into the year. Did not work, as we saw. And so, yeah, it just feels like Toronto are in the driver's seat. They're trying to upgrade their team. Minnesota then acquires the pieces that Toronto dropped. It does feel like for sure that Ultra has held up to a higher standard, at least based off recent results. I think there's a heavy debate right now in the community in terms of who is better right now, Minnesota or Toronto? Is it ROKKR? Is it Ultra? Both these teams were, funny enough, tied in the coaching poll at third for power rankings based off of scrim results, etc. Which, again, like I said, just adds even more fun to the interesting storyline between these two teams. For Toronto, big moves during this offseason, right? This is their first time in an off season. Like I said, not considering the very opening season of the CDL, which again is not technically an off season. But this is the first time for Toronto Ultra that they have made a move during an off season, which I know is kind of like a weird stat, but it's funny because Toronto is a team that just doesn't often make a roster move outside of what they originally did, as we know in MW2 or in MW 2019, coming from Modern Warfare to Cold War, they kept the same team. From Cold War, as we know, into Vanguard, they kept the same team. Now from Vanguard to MW2, they have dramatically changed things up from the original Ultra 4 that we just talked about. Insight and Kleenex still here, but the coaching staff totally different, right? Mayhem as well as Marky B. It just feels like this makeup, like Toronto Ultra previously has been like the darlings of the CDL. It's like this is a team that is compassionate, that they are, they want to win with teamwork. Like you root for this team because of the faces that are on this roster, because of the way that they play the game. They play it the smart way. And now, by one addition, but specifically two additions, the makeup of Ultra is completely different. Like it feels like this is now possibly going to be one of like the bad boys of the league. Like the darlings have now changed up their team. They've changed up the face, the culture of this organization. And now it's like, we're going to be trash talking. We're going to be yelling at you across the stage. We're hyped. Like Kleenex in his opening video, whenever he was talking with CDL, was like, don't mess with us, like type deal. So very excited. Scrappy, it's his official debut. Now being, in the starting lineup, there's a huge amount of hype, obviously, around his level of play. Toronto would say a lot if they can walk away with this W, considering that they have changed up their roster as well in a big way. Scrappy plays well, already a favorite for Rookie of the Year. And then Standy versus ROKKR, right? He was the savior added to this team in Cold War. They expected to have, Standy level up in Vanguard. Didn't have that. And so there's a lot of questions on him overall as a player. Was that just a flash in the pan, or can he really be the player for this team moving forward, or be a franchise defining player as he was back in Cold War? So again, our lock of the week, I'll be honest with you guys. I think that this goes to game 5 regardless. I really do. Because like I said, I'm not just saying this because it's the Battle of the North with all the storylines, but literally because both of these teams, I've gone back and forth on who I like more, who I felt like did the right move, who won the offseason, who won the exchanging of players, considering that they were both at third, and the coaching power ranking says a lot. So I think with all of those things in mind, I'm going to give Ultra the nod. I feel like both teams are going to have to adapt to their new squads. I think a big, fun element to this series is going to be Cammy versus Scrappy. I mean, Scrappy literally was the guy. Like the reason why Toronto Ultra probably ends up breaking up is because Scrappy, like he's the guy that we're waiting on, constantly waiting to see, is Ultra going to make a change? We know who it's going to be. We know for what players it's going to be possibly for, but at what time, at what moment they're able to hold on for long enough. But there is just so much to this match that I cannot wait to see how it unfolds. It's going to be a great way to kick off Saturday. I think Toronto takes it, and this is just a very, very rough start for Minnesota. Two very formidable opponents, but just falling short in back-to-back game 5s. ROKKR start off 0-2. 0-2. Rough. But somebody has to lose. Somebody has to lose. We'll jump in quickly to NYSL versus London. This is both of these teams' very first series in New York. They end up adding Priesta and Skies to their team. Feels like a lot of people are either high on New York or not at all. London, right? They lose Afro. They don't bring back Gizmo. One of the last teams to announce their roster. They end up adding Paul X previously from NYSL. So a little bit of a rivalry game for him. We know there's a little bit of bad blood based off of the offseason as well. Asim as well added from the LAG bench as he was placed after their Major 2 victory. Never saw any success after that. And they didn't continually despite dropping him. It's honestly a good way, I think, for both these teams to start the season. I feel like this has the possibility to be close. Honestly, I feel like London is secretly a better team than we're giving them credit for. I know Paul X has been very vocal on social media talking about, hey, we need to roll the dice again on the coaching poll. So I do think that New York wins this series, but I think it does go down to a game 5. I almost hesitate to maybe give London the victory here because, again, I just feel like there is a little element to like Ravens considered by far the worst team in the league. It's the way that like power rankings have gone, coaching power rankings, tiers, all those things. Nobody's expecting anything from London. And for a team that I personally am not the biggest fan of in NYSL, I think there is something to be said that there could be a surprise victory in this matchup. I will say that without actually doing it. That's the way that I like to roll. I like to highlight something and then not actually do it. But I'm going to say that the Ravens at least make this one competitive. I think it goes to 5, but it will be NYSL getting their first win on the board next series. Seattle versus Boston Breach, a matchup that I am very eager to see. It feels like it's going to be kind of a nice barometer for both of these rosters. I think Boston definitely improved during the offseason. So for Seattle, you're trying to figure out where you are after what should be a victory over the Gorillas. And the same thing can be said for Breach, who I think are off of the loss versus the Atlanta phase. Where do both these teams sit right now? Et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to go for, I don't know. Like, I think I'm going to go for a bit of an upset here. I am. I think there's a lot of people who are going to say Surge. I understand that. I just feel like matchup wise, this could be a breakout game for Big Wake and for Nero. I'm a huge fan of what they were able to do. I feel like this Boston team could be a hot and cold type of roster. Like I said, I'm still slightly concerned a little bit about the Seattle Surge. Like, I know that they are stepping into their second season. I feel like there is a new level of confidence that they have in each other, but there is something to be said that this is the same team who have the same tendencies, etc. So I think with that, I'm going to go for a little bit of an upset here. Like I said, I think this has the ability to maybe be closer than people expect. Because of that, I'm going to go for a surprise. I think the Boston end up taking this in a 3-1 fashion. Breach come out strong. Methods plays well. It really is going to be a battle of the ARs for sure in each of these series. Civ and Accuracy versus Methods and Awakening. I'm going to give Boston the nod. I don't know. You got to go for some surprises. Like, this week is definitely going to have some upsets. So with that being the case, you have to know where to pick and choose. And it just feels like Seattle-Boston could be one of those games. Yeah, I think it could be. So I'm going to go with Boston to walk away with it. That's a huge victory for them. Seattle start things off 1-1. Same thing can be said for the Boston Breach. Let's jump into our final game of Saturday. Florida versus Vegas. Vegas are off the match versus LA Thieves. I have them at 0-1. Florida, this is their very first season together. Our very first matchup of this season. Their first official game as a lineup together. The positive, I guess, if you are Florida, hey, we got a chance to watch some VOD. We can see how Vegas did versus the Thieves, certain strategies that they were able to implement, et cetera, et cetera. But this is really the Mutineers restart, right? Major Maniac is back, but they bring in Vehicle and Brack from Challengers. They bring in Havoc, who was not brought back to the Minnesota ROKKR. Lots of negativity around this team. I know some of my talent counterparts have labeled the Florida Mutineers as the worst team in the CDL. So there is that stigma that's going on around them right now. And again, I'm going to go for another off-kilter pick. Like, I think there's a lot of people who are going to go for Vegas here. And I understand it. I totally do. I just feel like this is going to be more of a 2-3-5 type of series. I think this is going to be Florida showing off their strength in Search and Destroy. I think as well for the Mutineers, there is this level of the same thing with the Ravens, right? Everybody's counting us out. Nobody expects us to do well. Vegas, who is considered to be one of the better teams in the game, at least to start off the year, is going to have, all the eyes on them, all of the expectations, all of the prediction picks on this roster to walk away with it. I just think that this Mutineers roster as well is one that's going to sacrifice. It's a team that I think everybody is going to go, for the long rotation. Everybody's going to be making, most of the time, the smart play. I really, really think that a lot of people are going to be surprised by Brack's level of play. I think I've heard a lot of good things about him in scrimmages so far. I really like Vehicle and Havoc together on this team. And like I said, I think their Search Destroy is going to be strong as well. I'm going to say that Florida ends up taking it in a grueling Game 5 series. It's a slow start for Vegas, but I don't know. It's like I just don't see the way that they take down the Thieves. And then in this matchup versus the Mutineers, it's like, okay, Hardpoint they could do it. I don't know if they're going to beat Mutineers in 2 hard points. I like the Mutineers more in S&D. And then Control is a total coin flip right now. I have no idea how teams are going to play overall in Control. So I think that Vegas, despite the hype, surprisingly, I know it's weird. Like, I'm almost debating on if I should still keep this same prediction. I think the Florida ends up walking away with it in 5. Vegas start off 0-2 as we now head in to Sunday. LAG versus London, 2 teams that I have off of a loss. LAG lose to Seattle in my predictions. London end up losing to New York. I think that one's going to be very close. This is a nice little grudge game for Asim, right, versus his old team, going for another upset. I feel like London come out with the fire. I really do. I think that the LAG easily could start off 0-2, which is worrying considering what this team did during the offseason, right? They invest in RCs, they invest in Spark. I mean, I think they tweeted out that they have offered them 3-year deals, so they're going long-term with those 2 especially. But I think that London come out with the point to prove. As I said, I think that LAG end up playing, okay in that Seattle series, but I think that London, off of a close series versus New York, they're hungry to get a W. You've got 2 of your newest additions playing their old teams. It would really hurt a lot if you are London to lose to both New York and to LAG for both of these situations. I think that London end up taking it. I'm going to say 3-1. So like we said, I think questions quickly come out about the Gorillas. Was this the right team? Should we, have dropped one of the 3 players that were on the lineup last year? Again, I still have faith in the Gorillas. I don't think this is going to be a throwaway season by any stretch of the imagination. But sometimes, it's one of those roster moves that have to come in. It's that little kick in the backside that makes you have to play a little bit better. So I think that London actually take this and have not a bad season, or rather not a bad start to the season. LAG 0-2. Hard. It's hard. It's really hard to make these predictions right now. I'm not going to lie. Let's jump in now to OPTX versus Florida. A little bit of a rivalry this past season, right? As Florida was messing around with OPTX at majors, it felt like they were the kryptonite, surprisingly, to this OPTX team. Florida very well could be 0-1 after the loss to Vegas. However, I think they end up taking that series. So again, you're in higher spirits potentially if you are a Mutineers fan coming into this matchup. OPTX, I have off the win versus ROKKR. Again, both these teams, I have at 1-0 coming into this game. Some small situation happens, and both these teams could be 0-1 coming into this matchup, which means that it's a almost must win in that case. So I'm going to say for this series, this is going to have to be a very disciplined matchup for OPTX. Like, Florida Mutineers are going to be a team that I think is going to punish you for small mistakes. OPTX are going to have to be aware of that. They can't, fiddle around in the S&Ds. They can't have that moment where they don't rotate properly or they allow for spawns to flip. Like, the Mutineers are going to be like that annoying team that's constantly biting at your ankles. Like, in case you do move the wrong way, they're going to have to, they're going to make you pay for the small stuff. With that being said, I still like OPTX in this matchup. I know I've talked highly about the Florida Mutineers, but I just don't think it's going to be enough. I think this is probably a 3-1, maybe 3-0 based off of just matchup-wise, how I feel like both these teams fit against each other. But if you factor in, coaching power rankings, things like that, Florida not highly ranked, OPTX ranked 7th. So maybe this does go to a game 5. I just don't see a world in which OPTX lose this game unless mistakes are incredibly common. But I just don't think that's going to be the case for Optic in this situation. So moving on to our final 2 games of Major 1 Week 1, we are looking at LAT versus ATL. The Thieves versus FaZe, one of my favorite matchups in all of Major 1 qualifiers. This is a COD Champs Finals rematch. We know there's a little bit of bad blood, the way that Champs ended up going. Thieves ended up taking it. There was some drama that went on with Draza and, a few of the FaZe players. Not a whole lot of love lost when it comes down to both these rosters as well. I think that this is number 1 and number 2 right now. I'm not just saying that based off the coach polls, but what I've seen in scrimmages, which isn't a ton, but what I have seen in scrimmages, it looks like LAT and Atlanta are a tier above everybody else. That's the way that I think that it flows right now. For those that watch my tiers, you heard me talk constantly about how I feel like LAT and Atlanta are 1 and 2, and there's a pretty sizable drop off right now with 3, 4, 5, etc. So kind of getting into it, LAT 1-0 after the win versus Vegas in my predictions. I feel like I've been seeing them play some really good COD. Like, it's not like they're out slaying. It's more of like, hey, you know what? They're making the right plays. They're making the right rotations. It feels like, teams are making small mistakes when it comes to spawns. From what I've seen, it feels like Thieves are not having that same case. I really just think that Thieves are riding the high right now. Like, I know I didn't get a chance to break it down earlier as much in the matchup versus the Vegas Legion, but like I said, I don't know if Thieves are done riding off of what was just a wonderful end of the season. Like, they go back to back. They have that wonderful moment where they've won. I think that this team is hungry to experience that again. I really do. I think this team is hungry to have that same experience, to have that same feeling. And like I said, for them to be ranked number 1 in the coach power rankings does say a lot. As I said, for a team that is off of a championship, that did not experience any turbulence during the offseason. They knew they were all going to be on the team. They knew they were going to be playing together. They know, like I said, they're good. They're locked in. They're ready to go again. So I feel like with that being the case, you have to like this team a lot. I also am really keeping my eyes on Envoy in this series, and especially at the start, just in general of Major 1. I feel like he was a player that we did not talk enough about on the broadcast, about how his level of play turned around dramatically. Like, don't get me wrong, right? Octane's numbers were consistent and great throughout the end of the year. Kenny stepped up. Like, Draza was really good. But I feel like Envoy had a huge shift in his game where it wasn't about the long flanks. It wasn't about the rotations. It wasn't about, hey, let me go on flank to get a play from the back. It felt like he was running at people. It felt like he was an entry SMG who wanted to shut things down. And that's really my favorite Envoy, to be honest. Like, whenever I was able to watch him earlier on in his career, he played with that level of confidence, ego chows, etc. And so I feel like for the Thieves, if they can find that same form, if Envoy's playing that same level, it's going to be difficult for Atlanta FaZe to break out of situations like that. Now for Atlanta, right? 1-0 after the win versus Boston. Didn't get a ton of time to talk about them earlier. I think you're really looking at Slasher already in this situation. Like, you're facing off against a group of ARs. You have, without a doubt, the best AR in the league last year in Celium on your side. He's going to be able to do as much as possible, but it's really going to be on the Slasher. It's basically like you have the best AR versus the best AR team. And so you really throw into question, well, how is Slasher going to play? His level of what he is able to do, the decisions, the in-game stuff, but also just in general, his slaying numbers, I think will heavily define how this series looks. I think it would mean a lot for him, especially from a community perspective, to have a great start to the season, to get the victory versus Boston, who I think we all can agree made some good moves. The Thieves, defending champions. If they start off 2-0, beat the Thieves, which again was the team that caused them headaches to end out Vanguard, and ultimately made the roster change in the first place. Like, that is the reason why Atlanta FaZe makes this roster change. If they win champs, they're not changing. I'll let you guys know that right now. They're not changing if they win champs. If they win that grand final, they're not making moves. If he can come in, be that difference, it would basically, I think, show a lot of people Slasher was, in fact, the right player to put on this roster. And so I think whoever also wins this series, by the way, finishes 4-0 overall. Like, I think that they take this W, whether it's Thieves or whether it's FaZe, they ride that level of momentum into their following matchups, which they also, by the way, don't have easy matchups coming. Like, I think there's a Toronto for one of these teams. There's an Optic Texas, I want to say, for one of these teams. But I think whoever wins this game finishes off 4-0 and is a heavy favorite to get, one of those higher seeds. So now comes down to predictions, right? LA Thieves, Atlanta FaZe. Who am I rocking with? Who am I siding with? If you watched my tiers, I had Thieves ultimately at the end of Major 1 being my favorite roster. And there's a few different reasons for that. And I'm still going to stand by that despite choosing Atlanta FaZe to win this series. I will explain my thought process at another date. But I think that Atlanta FaZe gets this W. I, again, really like what the Thieves are doing. I just have a lot of confidence in this Atlanta FaZe roster. I think there's a lot for them to prove. I think this is a hungry team as well. Again, it's one of the most skilled rosters with all the hunger in the world to try to change the narrative around them that existed last season. A team that was good but couldn't come away with a W. The amount of second place finishes, the amount of questions, the fact that they couldn't figure out the mistakes they were making in game and translate those, figure them out. Slasher is the perfect person to do that for them. And so, like I said, I think Slasher is going to play well. I think Cillian has a great series, and I think that you do see a better overall performance from Simp and especially Abizi. As I said, a lot of focus on the SMGs. I think Vetoes are going to be a big factor in this one as well. I think you're going to see Thieves try to play a lot of big AR maps. I think for FaZe, you're going to try to see them navigate through, what maps can we afford to have that are AR heavy, the sides that you have to pick, all those things, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that Atlanta FaZe get the W in the end, and it goes to a game 5. It might be a 3-1. I think whoever you have in this matchup. But I really hope that it's a gauntlet game 5 type of game where we see, big blows exchanged either which direction. So, final match, Toronto Ultra versus the New York Subliners. It's an important one. It is, right? Toronto, I have them off of a W versus Minnesota. So there is that. It very well could be possible that in our lock of the week, we are wrong. And ROKKR ends up taking that. So it's a must-win basically for Toronto. You do not want to start off 0-2, especially when I think you either have Atlanta or Thieves still to face off against. I forget which one. So there is that element to it. Very, very big series, like I said, versus Minnesota. So there is that. I don't know. Like I'm looking at both these squads right now, and I'm like trying to factor in like different stories. I feel like, the ARs are going to be a big story for Toronto still. I'm really going to be looking at the SMG line in this series because for Kleenex, and for Kleenex and for Standy, like you are going to have, two players who are experienced with each other from New York. Again, New York, it's questionable, but I think that they do squeak past London. Not a great result for them. But you're going to be calling on Hydra to have an excellent series when it comes down to it. I think the SMGs are going to be a big story. You could say the same thing for the ARs, I guess. I just think that you like Toronto's ARs more. With that being considered, it then now puts more pressure on Kismet and Hydra to have to do their thing. So there is that aspect of it as well. So I've talked about it, right? Not the highest on the subliners for the moment. I think there's a very real possibility that maybe this one goes the other way. London ends up taking down New York, but I think that they are able to survive that series, but they don't survive Toronto Ultra. I think this is going to be a 3-1, maybe 3-0, but I think that Toronto just comes into form. I think this is a great series from the ARs, as I said, of Ultra. I think that Inside and Scrappy are a handful. And then you talk about the SMG side of things. It's like, well, Hydra and Kismet have to be at their same level of play. I think there is definitely a weakness in the SMGs of Ultra. So again, maybe you have NYSL trying to play more smaller maps. Maybe you have Toronto trying to play the bigger maps. Yeah, I don't know. I have my questions about Toronto, but I have even bigger ones about NYSL for the moment. So with that being the case, that is where we sit. That's how we close it out, right? New York, they barely get by 1-1. Toronto has a great week. They finish things off with a nice little 2-0 stat line as well. And I guess that's kind of be how we complete things. Like I'm almost looking back at my predictions being like, was that the right pick? Should I have switched things over again? I'm not going to be making any changes, I don't think, in week number 1. Sometimes I do that. I hesitate to try to do it often, but it does happen from time to time. I'm not going to lie to you. So let's go ahead and reflect back at our major matches of the week, and kind of talk about which ones that we went for. Again, I've got Optic Texas winning that massive series versus the Minnesota ROKKR. I think they get it done in a game 5. Another big series, LA Thieves versus Las Vegas Legion. A lot of hype around Vegas. Can they make that a series? Can they extend it to 5? I don't think so. I think Thieves close it out ultimately in a game 4. Difficult matchup for Vegas. As I said, I think Thieves are the better hardpoint team. If that is the case, it now puts pressure on Vegas to win the S&Ds, to win the controls. And then our lock of the week, Battle of the North, Minnesota versus Toronto. I think it goes to 5, and I give the slight edge to Toronto. I don't know. I just feel like Ultra right now in a good headspace. I feel like Scrappy will make the overall difference in this series. and depending on his level of play, that will definitely have an impact on how this series sways. But excited to see this new generation, this new vibe when we talk about Toronto. Moving into Boston versus Seattle, I went for an upset in this one. I went for Breach. I think that they do have a good lineup. I wanted to give them the nod because I feel like versus Seattle, a team that has been inconsistent in years prior, might slip up here versus this improved slang Boston Breach roster. Again, you have two very fast, aggressive SMGs. Maybe could cause some pressure for Mac that he's not able to handle. And then you got Big Wake and those huge moments, maybe in those S&Ds that Boston Breach were not able to translate last year. You know, they were great when it came down to respawn once they added Vivid to the team. S&D took a big hit. Awakening could be, you know, somebody to put up 8, 9, 10 kills that could get you that extra round that gives you a game victory that really seals the deal. And then we've got our final two games, Atlanta FaZe versus the LA Thieves, COD Champs rematch. I go for Atlanta in this one. I think that they close it out versus the Thieves. You know, number 1 and number 2 right now for me, at least in terms of power rankings right now. I give Atlanta FaZe the edge in this series. Huge revenge game. Excited to see that one play out. Maybe just as much as the Battle of the North. And then finally to close out Major 1, Week 1, Toronto Ultra. I think that they get the W versus New York. I've got it listed as a 3-1 W. NYSL, not the highest on them. I think there's real danger they go 0-2. But I think this is a good W for Toronto Ultra. I think regardless of if they lose that game versus Minnesota, they still take it here versus NYSL. But there will be a big focus on the SMG battle. Hydra, you know, based off of recency at least, best SMG in this lobby. But who do you side with more? Do you side with the new lineup of Ultra? Big focus is going to be on Standy without question to try and help Kleenex handle what will be most likely a very aggressive NYSL roster. So that is going to do it, ladies and gentlemen, for LandO's Lock-ins, Major 1, Week 1. The most important part of this series is your involvement, right? What do you think of my pickems? Where do you think I slipped up? Where do you think the mistakes were in the matches that I ended up choosing? Do you agree with my lock of the week? If I get it right, bonus points. We love bonus points here. And I really hope that we get that one right, because if not, it could be a tough week for me. It could be a tough week for me. I'm looking at my listing right now and I'm like, yeah, should I maybe gone the other way? I don't know. I know this was a longer week. I promise it's going to be shorter. I promise you that. We have more matches this week. I had a lot of explaining to do. Kind of getting back in the flow of things. This will not be as long moving forward, but I definitely wanted to explain everything out the way that it needs to be explained. So again, thank you guys so much for all the amazing support on this series. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. I mean, all of that with sincerity. Appreciate your guys' support on the channel. Make sure to check out all of the other content that is going on right now, whether it's under one roof, if it's the CDL podcast, if it's even this show, if it's the shorts that I'm doing. Make sure to check out anything and everything going on the channel because we are hitting MW2 hard when it comes down to the content game. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. We'll see how well we do. Best of luck to your pickems. See you guys very, very soon. Thank you so much for watching. See you later.